All right. Welcome, everyone. I think Sandra is frozen. She was going to give the introduction and say hi. We'll see if she becomes unfrozen. But in the meantime, I wanted to get started with our webinar today with Emily Suter. And Emily, I'm sure Sandra has a lovely introduction planned, and I don't. So I might just turn it over to you and ask you to introduce yourself and tell us about yourself. All I can say is that Emily is a huge friend of SOPHIA, and we're so happy to have you here giving your presentation today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I am going to share my screen and get that started. Thank you for being here today. Okay. Okay, can you see my slides? Thumbs up?
Yep.
Awesome.
They look great.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, and happy Leap Day. And spending your 366th day of the year listening to this webinar. I'm really excited to walk through this roadmap to HiAP, Health in All Policies, with you today. So my name is Emily Suter. I've worked in various leadership positions in multiple public health settings, including state and local government and nonprofit organizations. I've also worked in urban and rural communities. And I've always been interested in policy level interventions and changes because they are the foundation to improving more lives. My undergraduate degree focused on geography and environmental studies. And for my undergraduate honors thesis, I researched environmental injustice. And I then received my Master's of Science in Planning and Master's of Public Health, where I focused my efforts on the intersection of public health and planning. I conducted a housing health impact assessment for my master's thesis. And since then, I've worked on other health impact assessments, health improvement plans, strategic plans, quality improvement plans and projects, and most recently, health accreditation. And I'm currently studying the implementation of health in all policies in local governments for my DRPH dissertation at the University of Illinois at Chicago. As many of you know, SOPHIA is a community of health in all policies and health impact assessment practitioners. And I'm actively involved in the Health in All Policy work group. And I encourage any of you interested to join SOPHIA and the Health in All Policies work group. So today I'll be giving a quick overview on what Health in All Policies is and why it matters. And then I'll briefly talk about my research and the practice opportunity. And then I'll talk about the characteristics of Health in All Policy implementation, and all policy strategies, levels of maturity, and then equity in health and all policy implementation. And throughout today's presentation, there will be some audience participation opportunities, and I encourage you to ask questions in the chat, which we'll answer at the end of today's webinar. And thank you all for completing the brief poll during registration. The response rate was 86%. And of the people that answered the registration questions, 60% are currently engaged in health and all policies work, 14% weren't sure, and 27% were not yet doing health and all policies work. 39, so that's about 48%, have been doing health and all policy implementation for 1 to 4 years. And 16, that's 20%, have been working on health and all policies for over 5 years. And I encourage you to provide your experiences and insights throughout the presentation. And for those not sure or not yet engaged in health and all policies, this is a really great place to start learning about the approach and learning about what others are doing and the process to get started. So during this webinar, we'll be using the Mentimeter platform. And to access, you can go to menti.com and use the code on the screen, or you can use the QR code on the right side of the slide. You can also join on your phone or on a computer browser, either way. And then Oma will also put a link in the chat. And if you click that link, it'll take you to the poll. And please be handy throughout the presentation. We'll be doing several activities using this system. So I'll give everyone a few seconds to get on to the Mentimeter poll. Oh, you're already doing it. This is great. Okay, so what type of organization are you currently representing? We have some local government, state government, education. And also, as you're doing this poll, please type where you're currently located in the chat. I couldn't fit all the localities on one Mentimeter poll. So I would love for you to put where you're located. And let me open the chat too. Okay. Awesome. A lot of local government, education. I see DC, Wisconsin, Washington, Tennessee. Wow. Some Florida folks, Illinois. Awesome. Well, keep this handy. We're going to be doing a few more Mentimeter activities throughout this webinar. And I have one more activity actually, right? Let me click through to the next one. Okay. And I do want to note, if you don't see the activity on on your Mentimeter poll browser yet, just refresh your slide. So that that will work as well. So just reactivate that by refreshing. And so this is a word cloud. And so just let us know what excites you in all policies. Collaboration, that's a great one. Yes, opportunity, health, innovation. Gosh, these are great. And if you see anything on the slide that resonates with you, that you want to further highlight, just resubmit. You can submit several times. Awesome. Collaboration's a good one. Partnerships, solving wicked problems, forward thinking, health for all. These are all great. Efficiency, learning a new skill. Awesome. Okay. And as one more reminder, just keep the Mentimeter open and we'll have a few more activities throughout the presentation. And this may be a review for some of you, but I wanted to set the stage for this conversation. Clinical care and medical services are less important than many people think, whereas social and economic factors, so those social determinants of health and the physical environment, are quite influential on health and well-being. Factors such as where we live, the state of our environment, genetics, our income, education level, and our relationships all have considerable impacts on health, while the more commonly considered factors such as medical care and access and use of healthcare services often have less of an impact. As you see on this slide, an estimated 96% of our health expenditures are directed towards healthcare, but access to healthcare and medical care only accounts for 20% of the factors that determine a person's health. Conversely, the environment and our behavior, which is directly influenced by our environment, accounts for nearly 80% of what determines our health, but it makes up less than 4% of national expenditures. Social determinants of health, those social and economic factors, they matter because they set the conditions that influences the health of individuals and populations. And if these social determinants of health are not distributed fairly, they can lead to health inequities. And current public health interventions largely focus on how organizations and policies can affect individual change and often neglect to examine the broader impacts of the conditions, the environment, and the context in which these policies are created. And as you can see on the county health rankings model on the left-hand side of the slide, clinical care accounts for 20% of the health factor score. And this points to the importance of broader contextual influences on public health that are often neglected. And then the health impact you might have seen before on the right side of the screen, the lower level of the pyramid represents changes in those social determinants of health, those social and economic factors. Also, and then the tip of the pyramid represent the changes primarily at the individual level. And so interventions that focus on the lower level of the pyramid tend to be more effective because they reach broader segments of the society and require less individual effort. And then implementing across all of the levels of the pyramid can boost the impact of work and better support health and well-being of members and their families. And I do want to mention too that some of the greatest public health hits, the greatest public health achievements are policy driven. So there's two types of policies. So policies are established by national, state, or local governments. So that's known as big P policy, or they can be passed privately by organizations, and that's small p policies. So policy changes influences the choices individual make lives and their access to resources. For example, policies can create and regulate transportation systems, regulate air and water quality, set requirements and mandates that protect citizens. So think about seatbelt laws, and then provide direct support and services. So like the SNAP program is a really good example. They can also reduce barriers and incentivize choices that impact health. By definition, health in all policies is a collaborative approach that integrates health and equity considerations into policymaking across sectors to improve the health of communities and people. Health in all policy strategies start upstream or midstream, so up here on the graphic, and they focus on a policy area, so transportation or housing, rather than one specific problem, and then aiming to understand how policies in that area may impact health outcomes. In other words, the health in all policies approach recognizes that health is determined by these dynamic upstream and midstream factors, and by addressing the social determinants of health and these social and economic factors, health in all policies can affect change, and it improves the policies, systems, and environments that influence health and health inequities. So why does health in all policies matter? Governments throughout the United States, they're facing major societal challenges, as you're seeing in the news every single day. And these are issues that stretch across boundaries, they cross sector divides, they impact economic, social, and environmental goals, and they fail to respond to traditional government policy solutions. And these increasingly complex problems, also known as wicked problems, have made governments aware that joined up policymaking is needed. And this also aligns, you may have seen the Biden-Harris executive order that discusses the whole of government approach to climate. And as we just discussed in the previous few slides, it's understood that health and well-being can be adversely affected by policies outside the purview of the health sector. Health is a multidimensional construct, and so actions on these determinants of health, they're required to advance human development, sustainability, and equity, as well as to improve health outcomes. Health in all policies provides a useful and robust mechanism to facilitate the co-design and co-production of policy solutions that deliver benefits to health and partnering sectors. The approach is increasingly being seen as an effective way to implement cross-sector action. And so today we'll be talking about the overarching characteristics and the implementation strategies that can be applied to your health in all policies work. And the goal today is to share information to help you increase collaboration in policymaking or initiate or strengthen your health in all policy approach. So before diving into all of this, I want to share a little bit about my upcoming research to provide some context and some background for today's conversation. So one gap that I observed in the literature and heard from practitioners, and at the onsite, I don't know if y'all remember this, if you attended this webinar, last year, the Health Impact Project and onsite partners had a webinar. Last year, they saw in that and found in that webinar and through the report that it's difficult to know whether the patterns of implementation have changed over time. And additionally, local governments of health in all policies is still poorly understood. Many cases of health in all policy implementation by local governments have yet to be closely examined, and the information available on health in all policy implementation at the local level is still in its infancy, which points to a lack of rigorous evaluation. And there's also increasing interest in how the effectiveness of the health in all policy approach can be optimized, and that includes looking at the enablers and the barriers to health in all policy implementation. And finally, there's a need for more research assessing why certain implementation practices work in some settings and what characteristics support and influence the implementation. My study will assist local governments and other jurisdictions in making the case for investments in cross-sector work. Evidence shows that the local level may be the best for improving health. At the local level, of course, there's a closer proximity between the decision makers and their constituents, which increases the likelihood of collaboration and the execution of policies. And local governments are often very familiar with their constituents' needs, the political nuances, and this could positively impact implementation efforts. I have two main research questions and three sub-questions. I don't have the sub-questions on the slide, but I start with the current state and then end with the future state. And I'm primarily interested in understanding how local governments implement health and all policies, including how strategies and characteristics enable and promote implementation. I'm seeking to better understand the opportunities for improving health and all policies in local governments. And the study will use a qualitative multiple case study design to better understand this phenomenon. The recommendations from the findings of the study will provide information to local governments and other jurisdictions so they can initiate or implement health and all policies. The 2021 PH1 survey, and we had a lot of health department folks, but that's a it's a national public health survey, accentuated more than ever that policy engagement and topics related to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion were identified as important areas of needed training. And the findings from my study can help build the foundation and inform what other types of knowledge, skills, and abilities are needed, along with giving practical examples of what kind of competencies are needed to implement health and all policies successfully. So now I'll be talking about the characteristics of health and all policy implementation, health and all policy implementation strategies, and then levels of maturity, and then we'll close with equity and health and all policy implementation. So before I move forward, I want to spend a few minutes distinguishing the difference between the characteristics versus the implementation strategies through an analogy. So I want you to think about health and all policies as a cake. And I want you to dream about your favorite cake in the world. It can be red velvet, chocolate, carrot cake. There's so many good choices. And so all of those cakes have things in common. And these ingredients like eggs, butter, milk, flour, those are the characteristics. And then the recipe instructions, how you use these ingredients, those are the strategies. And so now I want you to get your Mentimeter ready, open your browser, have it ready on your phone. We're about to do one more activity or another activity. We have a lot more. Okay. Okay, so you may need to refresh your browser to see the new Mentimeter poll, just as a note. But what do you think is required for health and all policy implementation? Pie in the sky. There's no wrong answers. Communication, that's a great one. And even if you've already submitted, I want to note again that you can submit again if you see something that resonates with you that you want to amplify. Awesome. Collaboration, community engagement, partnerships, interest, accountability. These are all great. Buy-in. Listening. Yeah, that's a good one. Community engagement's getting highlighted the most so far in communication. These are all great. Gonna wait for the word cloud to slow down and give everyone a chance to submit. Research and data, feedback. Good. Staff. Realistic expectations. It's a good one. They're all great. Investment. Wow, these are great. Leadership just came out of nowhere. It got in the center real quick. So I like that one. Okay. This is awesome. Okay, well, thank you for doing that activity. We'll have a few more. So again, keep it handy as we go through this presentation. Okay, so what supports health and all policy implementation? And some of you already mentioned some of these. That's great. So I saw leadership there. I saw some in funding and investments, workforce capacity. I saw some under communication, research evaluation. So that's great. That's awesome. And this slide provides characteristics for successful implementation of health and all policies. And these characteristics represent the features needed to implement health and all policies. And they are aspects of influences its successful uptake or use. So leadership, that encompasses leaders in both the outer and inner context. And what I mean by that is outer is in the system outside your organization, and then the inner context is within your organization itself. So these leadership champions for health and all policies can promote positive implementation outcomes because leaders support health and all policies work. They provide justification for using time on this work, and they can allocate resources to do these cross-sector initiatives. Funding and investment, that refers to the monetary and other support provided by the system in which the implementation occurs. And there's evidence that investing in public health promoting policies can yield significant returns in terms of improved public health and well-being. And building off funding, and I saw this in the word cloud as well, workforce capacity enables implementation. A core team with a range of competencies are necessary to implement health and all policies. They provide a foundation to support and grow health and all policies action. So that could be a dedicated position, a task force, a steering committee, or a person or group accountable for implementation. And it's a pivotal enabler for health and all policies. Creating ongoing capacity needs to be complemented with building future capacity. Effective collaboration is central for health and all policies practice. And ultimately, effective policymaking, of course, is about the people. And so collaborations lead to a greater understanding of unintended consequences of policies and intervention across sectors. Strong collaborations also help maintain trust and credibility and facilitate the emergence of policy champions to promote health and all policy principles. Having a cross-sector committee for health and all policies can aid in implementation by providing opportunities for discussion and opportunities for learning, and can foster understanding about how those non-health decisions can impact health and equity outcomes. And the ways of working to implement health and all policies are highly context specific, and different approaches can also be used at different points in the policymaking process to enable the co-creation of policy solutions and help navigate complex and these wicked public health and policy issues. Communication not only involves creating common goals, but it means creating a regular meeting and communication schedule. Both of these can aid in successful implementation. And last, but certainly not least, is research, evaluation, and data. And that means partners and collaborators integrate cross-sector data and indicators into health data sets, including health indicators into program evaluation, and use this data to validate health performance measures. Identify and present evidence on health impacts, so it speaks to the goals of partnering agencies. And the use of evidence is important in demonstrating the links between health and the work of other sectors, and reinforces the value of evidence-informed activities. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but I wanted a takeaway from this webinar. So these are some questions to consider as you're putting the ingredients together to build the health and all policy cake. So the slide set will be shared after this meeting. And so this is a slide to bookmark. It's slide 20. And so it's something to print out and have in front of you as you're thinking about how to implement health and all policies. Before we jump into the health and all policy strategies, I want to briefly introduce the phase of health and all policies that we'll be discussing, and that's implementation. In implementation science and practice, there are hundreds of implementation frameworks. One of my professors once said, implementation frameworks are like toothbrushes. Everyone has their own and no one wants to use each other's. So that's just evidence that there's a lot out there, and just further evidence there's a lot. So implementation for our purposes is the stage where the adopted practice, in this case, it's health and all policies, is implemented. So this is where the rubber meets the road and you use the agreed upon strategies and actions. Speaking of strategies comprise the roadmap to implementation and are defined as to use to enhance the adoption, implementation, and sustainability of a program or practice. These 7 strategies you may have seen before. They're commonly used in the health and all policy space. The SOPHIA work groups use them. I've seen NATO reference them. They've been used in ASHTO as well. And they were originally sourced from a Gase et al. Article in 2014. And as I'm looking at the literature and starting to look at other documents, other health and all policy documents, I found some emerging patterns. And those are the ones I want to focus on today. So capacity. So strengthening the skills and resources within our workforce and partnership are key to amplify impact. You can really leverage the resources outside your internal workforce to help implement health and all policies. And using tools such as health impact assessment, health note are important to infuse health and equity considerations into our decision-making process. So it's important to think about equity as you're working on health and all policies. And finally, at the very bottom of the slide, you'll see community engagement. And as I'm seeing in the literature and hearing from practitioners, there's a need to engage with people with lived experiences who face inequities. So now I want to hear from you. So have your Mentimeter poll ready for the next activity. Oops. Okay. Okay, so which of these health and all policy strategies that we just talked about do you have the most experience with? There's develop and structure cross-sector relationships, enhance workforce and partner capacity. You'll see them on the slide or on your Mentimeter poll. And remember, you can choose more than one. And for those of you with experience with 2 or more, please write down the combination of strategies in the chat. Okay. Synchronized communications and messaging is a big one, incorporating health and equity into decision-making. Those cross-sector relationships, that's huge. Engage with people with lived experiences who face inequities. That's great. Awesome. I see workforce and partner capacity up and communications and messaging too. That's great. Awesome. Okay. And I have one more activity. So keep that Mentimeter open for the next one. Next slide. Okay. In your experience, have you seen or used any other health and all policy implementation strategies? And if so, what are they? And it can be single actions or they can be a combination of actions. So it can be as complex as you'd like. I'd love to see what other strategies you're using or a combination of them that you're using that you find particularly helpful. Roundtable discussions, that's a good one. Oh, I love that. Listening sessions, tools like health impact assessment, establishing work groups, education and outreach. These are all great. Information sharing. Oh, making sure that engaged partners are already doing that type of work in their daily routine. Does not create an extra burden, is more likely to get done. It's great. Engaging with those who hold power to implement change. I like how this is phrased. Blending and braiding of funding. Great phrasing. It's really well said. Awesome. These are all great. Thank you. Okay. See, we're slowing down, so I'll go to the next slide. Oh, I see one more. Supporting and drafting sustainability. It's great. Okay. Let me go to the next slide. Okay, so to give some background before we talk about levels of maturity, I want to just give some information about maturity models. So maturity models offer insight into how implementation progresses. Maturity models originated as tools to evaluate the implementation of company training programs. And this movement inspired companies and organizations to explore other continuous quality improvement methods, such as And software engineers actually developed the first formal maturity model. And maturity models have recently been expanded to use in other sectors and other places in academia. So social sciences, public administration, and public health. So why look at maturity of health and all policies? So it helps document the status of health and all policy practice in local governments in order to begin to establish an account of health and all policy models and to examine current progress. So for this, you see on the slide, the Complete Streets Maturity Model was selected as inspiration because of its relevance to health and all policies work. If you don't know, Complete Streets is an approach to planning, designing, building, operating, and maintaining streets that enables safe access for all people who use them. So that's pedestrian, bicyclists, motorists, transit riders of all ages and abilities. And one of the key parallels between health and all policies and Complete Streets is they're both cross-sector approaches to policy systems and environmental change. And so while we're focused on health and all policy implementation, there are lessons from Complete Streets that can be used. So for the next activity, I don't know if you have used Annotate. This is a function in Zoom. And how you get to Annotate is that you'll see I'm sharing my screen. At the very top, you'll see you're viewing my screen. And then you'll hover over View Options. And then once you see View Options, at the third from the bottom, you see Annotate. And I want you to click on that, and then you'll see all of these symbols. And then you click on the third one from the top, and it's this check mark. And then you just click on the stamp that you want to use, but don't click on the slide quite yet. The next slide, I'll have you click on the slide. But yeah, pick your stamp and have it ready to go. I'll give everyone a few seconds to get that pulled up. And you can pick any of the shapes. Okay. And once you have a shape selected, I want you to look at this question. So answer this question of what level is your jurisdiction at in the implementation of health and all policies? So if you click on the stamp, click on one of these circles. You can click anywhere really in any areas. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry. Okay, let me go back. Okay, so interested is you're not yet engaged, but you're interested in implementing health and all policies. Health and all policies is ad hoc, informal, champion-driven, managed. It's explicit and understood. They're limited accountability and uneven alignment with partners, and there are infrastructures in development. Integrated is implementation is standardized and performance is managed. And then optimizing is that formal partnerships and accountability structures and their cycles of continuous quality improvement. So I'm seeing a range. I love this. Okay, good. We have some interested, performed, managed. Great. Awesome. I'm seeing a range. I see a lot in the between the performed, managed, and in the managed. So that's great. I don't see any in the optimizing yet, and that's okay. I'll give everyone a few more seconds to put your stamps on the slide. Awesome. Okay. I think everyone's good. I don't see any more stamping, so I think we're good. Oma, do you mind helping me clear out let me see if I can clear it out. I'm going to clear out the stamps. Okay, thank you. Okay. So now we'll be talking, and we'll be talking more about this at the in-person practitioner workshop in April, but I wanted to start the conversation about equity in health and all policy implementation. So while health and all policy, as you know, is a relatively well-developed area of inquiry, ongoing research and conversations do not always center efforts on health equity, despite equity being an underlying value of health and all policies. So in reviewing the implementation science literature and practice documents, I found that equity is only explicitly mentioned in a few implementation frameworks. I also found that equity considerations in the literature, they mentioned that it must be included during the strategy creation and selection process. So given the centrality of equity in health and all policies, consideration should be afforded to assessing health and all policies, and particularly when thinking about what successful implementation may look like. So now we are going to do another Mentimeter activity. Okay. Oops. Okay. So in your experience, or in what you know, how can equity be centered in health and all policy implementation? And again, if you don't see an update on Mentimeter quite yet, refresh your browser. I've heard of some using equity assessment tools. Okay, tracking concrete impacts or lack thereof. That's a good one. Yes. Equity officer, that's part of the process. Community members as equal partners. Integrating tools and methods already used. These are all great. Intentional inclusion of equity framing tools. Oh, racial equity impact assessment. These are great. I think I have to scroll down. Okay. Okay. Considering equity first, not just as an afterthought, using existing data, such as environmental justice areas to focus on certain neighborhoods, intentional investment in community engagement, paying people with lived experiences who are part of the process. These are all great. Okay. I'm going to go to our discussion question. These are all great. Thank you. So I would like to hear from you, and you can either get off mute or you can put your responses in the chat. Either works. What does health and all policies look like when you're done? Is there a finish line for health and all policies, and what does this look like? So any brave souls want to get off mute, or we can you can put answers in the chat as well. Either way. And now we would be a great time. We can answer questions as well. So I see, Aaron, I saw you put your camera on. Did you want to comment?
Sure. I think that there's a finish line for projects, like individual health and all policies projects, but not ever for saying we're all health and all policyed up now. I think that there's always moving targets, changes in our policy systems and environments that are going to need tweaking, and things we can do to support just the residents of the areas that we serve.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Aaron. There's no finish line. Let me see. There's no finish line. It looks like the whole of government is working together to address community needs. And Nina, it gets easier to integrate because the hard work of stage has occurred. So then it becomes an expectation, an expected component. Okay. So it kind of morphs into that. Constantly ensuring that staff are constantly looking at projects through a health lens. Yes, Sydney, I like that too. Community resilience increases. It's a good. These are all great. Okay, and it's like we have some time. I wanted to leave some time to talk about this and to also open the floor for any questions, comments. I want this to be a dialogue about the characteristics, implementation strategies, equity, and health and all policy implementation. So I open the floor. Any questions, comments, lessons, experiences you want to share? The floor is yours.
You know, Emily, I wonder if it's helpful for you to maybe ask the audience a little bit more about like their activities, right? Because one of the things is for me, for HiAP, right? It's how rich are your partnership activities? How deep is your collaboration, right? Like what's the series or the sets of projects that you've worked on? Right?
Yeah.
Do you all have like a sense of how many projects does it take for you to work through with your collaborators before you feel like you're doing health and all policies even?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, does anyone want to share? Have any thoughts on that?
I'm curious. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Sandra Whitehead. I'm the current president of SOPHIA. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. My computer rebooted just as we were getting started, so I didn't get to greet you all. But I think, I would like to hear the types of projects you're working on. When Health and All Policies was still pretty new, it seemed like the most people were working on built environment projects, working with like their planners or their developers or in their communities. I'm curious as to whether what kinds of projects people are working on. What's the sort of area you all are working in? Is it transportation? Is it built environment? Like, I'd be interested to hear those kind of like, what's your focus?
And you can type in the chat if you don't want to talk.
Yeah, awesome. I was just gonna say that. Anna's
Food
working on
systems.
food systems. Yeah, sorry, Sandra.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna read probably the same one of food systems. I would love to hear more about that. That's really interesting. That's great. Anna, do you want to, but if you want to get off mute and talk about that, I'd love to hear more.
Okay, hello, everybody. Where to start with this? This has been driven by a rather peculiar kind of situation and policy challenge where for those of you that don't know, this area is one of the main agricultural production areas in the entire country. We provide green vegetables. Actually, right now, the lettuce and the broccoli and the cabbage and the cauliflower that you're eating probably comes from here. Then in the summertime, when it gets really hot, it switches to the Central Valley in California. Anyway, the strange aspect of our challenge is that despite being a major agricultural producer, we have massive problems with food insecurity. So that's what is driving and has been driving our focus on this specific issue. I don't know if you need to know more. We're just sort of at the beginning stages. We're forming a food alliance or food policy council, if you want to call it that. Many of you are probably familiar with that kind of approach.
Oh, that's great, Anna. That's really, really great. How many years have you, did it start this year, or how many years or have you been working on it?
Well, it started way back in 2013, of course, now more than 10 years ago, with a push to increase the number of community gardens in this area. And then it sort of has gathered steam. There was quite a bit of success with that. And then it kind of broadened to look at the whole question of food systems.
Wow. Awesome. It's great work. And I saw a few folks put some examples in the chat of what they're working on. So do any of you want to get off mute and talk about those projects? So Kristen, Audrey, Sydney, any of you want to talk about those really great projects that you're working on?
This is Audrey. I can get started. Maybe I can get my video on here as well. So I mentioned a lot of a built environment space that we're in, and maybe like the newest one is the zoning code rewrite. So city zoning code hasn't kind of, I guess they use the word overhaul really. So kind of a lot of major updates, and I work at a local health department. So our health department was invited into the conversations early on. And I felt like we also didn't know, we're not planning experts. There's a lot of planning research out there about how to make more inviting sidewalks and how to make more inviting downtowns and, building height and tree density and all sorts of things like that. And so we felt, well, we recognized there's a lot of opportunities to improve health here, and we needed to rely on the planning experts as far as what some of the research they have more of that research at their fingertips, and we were prompting it. And so it was a little bit of a weird kind of iterative process, but overall it's been a positive opportunity, and a lot of community engagement happening as well. And that's been spurred by the city too, to talk to people about, should we discontinue having drive-throughs in our downtown? That makes it a more walkable environment. It also, up here in Wisconsin, is a disservice to people in the wintertime who might have some mobility challenges. What are the economic impacts? So I'm kind of talking about a lot of the questions that have come up, but I think overall it's a good opportunity to really do some health and all policies work and relationship building, so that as other things come down the pipeline for built environment or other issues, we have some of those staff level connections and familiarity with each other as well.
Yeah, that's really great. And how did health get to the table on that? Was that something they reached out to you, or were you already at the table?
I will say this is not the first time that the city and health department have talked about built environment things. This would have been almost 10 years ago. The city had a couple of years, a conference called Be Fit, Built Environment Fit conference. And it was like a day-long conference, mostly with local partners. So that was 10 years ago. And then we've had other projects where we've talked about employer assisted housing. We've talked about redeveloping an area into a park and how to make that accessible to a neighborhood that was otherwise maybe a lower income neighborhood. So there's been sort of, we have talked about complete streets in the past as a community. So there's been sort of this, this little step here and this little step here and this little touch base there and this walk out it over there and a reconstruction here that we've kind of been involved in. But one thing that helped us was that at the health department, we had people who were ready to have some of those conversations and, even do like a desktop review of, I don't know anything about how wide a bike path should be, to optimize space for everyone. But we had people that were ready to kind of take on some of that work and engage in that conversation. And so that helped us to be ready as more came down the pipeline.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Thank you for sharing, Audrey. So Sydney and Kristen, I also put some health and all policy initiatives in the chat. I don't know if you want to talk about those. Feel free to hop off mute. No pressure either way.
This is Kristen. So I'll talk a little bit about, I did mention in the chat, we also have a built environment that's in a different office division from what I do, but in our preparedness and response group that I'm in, we're kind of the ones, that deal with a lot of emergencies, disasters, incidents. And so what we're trying to do, especially Harris County in Texas, it's the largest county and also is very multicultural, 142 languages spoken. So it really is imperative to truly understand and know your communities, and in some instances, really gain their trust. And, you know, we do this as part of, you know, preparing and having community engagement, function, either, setting up specific, forums to talk to people about, certain types of, preparedness, emergency situations, or, you know, just in general on, hearing their needs, hearing, what issues are. So then when, situation does happen, you know, we have a better understanding, and with the focus of how readily, you know, I typed in a lot, resiliency, that, you know, focusing too on these communities that they, you know, are able to get back to, normal per se. But that, we factor that in, and we actually do have in our incident command system, a resilience, officer, equity officer.
How long has that position been around, Kristen? Is that a fairly new development?
It came after, I want to say it came as a result of, lessons learned from Hurricane Harvey.
Okay.
But it was something that we had, already in place, for our COVID response.
Wow, thank you for sharing, Kristen. It's awesome work. Okay, and I see we, I think we have about 5 minutes left. My clock kind of disappeared. Yeah, we have about 5 minutes left. So I am going to close out with, let me reshare my screen real quick, with just some next on how you can get involved. So the SOPHIA Health and All Policy Work Group is looking for feedback on resources and staffing needed to implement a variety of health and all policy tactics. And we're tuning into practitioners in the field. So of course that's you, to weigh in. And the survey should take about 5 to 10 minutes. And we'd love for you to provide feedback by March 8th. And your responses will be incorporated into the new selector tool, which we'll talk about in the in-person workshop. And you can also enter your name into a drawing for a limited edition SOPHIA tote. And Oma just put the link in the chat. And if you're interested in joining the Health and All Policies work group, contact Oma. Her emails, she also put in the chat as well. And then finally, the SOPHIA workshop is April 11th and 12th. It's called Putting Together the Pieces, Tools and Strategies to Support Health and All Policies. So register for that, and we'd love to see you at the in-practitioner workshop. So any other questions, comments, I'd love to hear from you, or I'll stick around for a little bit if anyone wants to ask any questions after the webinar. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time today. And I hopefully will be having a webinar next year to talk about results and what changes, you know, in the next 12 months. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was really great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks everyone for coming.